I always thought the world would stop when Roy died. That the birds would forget to sing, the sun would forget to rise, and the clocks would stand still in mourning for the man who had built my world beside me. But it didn't. The morning of his funeral, the sky was bright. Unfairly so. The wind didn't howl. The trees didn't bow their heads. Everything moved forward like it always did, and that felt like the cruelest betrayal of all. I wore the navy blue dress Roy always said made me look sharp. Not beautiful, sharp. That was his way. He was never one for flowery words, but when he called me sharp, I knew he meant I looked strong, capable, like someone who could carry a life, and I had. 49 years of it. The funeral passed in a blur. Friends, neighbors, old co-workers all came with their casseroles and condolences. They said the same things. He was a good man. He loved you fiercely. You too had something rare. And we did. A quiet, weathered kind of love forged through years of small sacrifices and larger forgivenesses. It wasn't the kind you write poems about, but it was the kind that stayed. That mattered. But something about Ruth felt off. My daughter stood near the back, arms crossed, sunglasses on even inside the funeral home. She wasn't crying, wasn't even pretending to. Her husband, Mark, hovered beside her like an eager assistant, nodding along to every whispered word she tossed over her shoulder like she was orchestrating some business meeting instead of laying her father to rest. David, my son, was different. He sat beside me during the service, quietly gripping my hand like a boy again. His eyes were red, but he didn't make a scene. Roy had always said David was the heart of our little family, and watching him now, I believed it more than ever. But something clouded his face. Grief, yes, but also worry. Like he was carrying something heavy in his chest he hadn't told me yet. After the service, people trickled out, offering soft hugs and promises to check in soon, the kind we all knew were empty. I stood by the front door, thanking guests one by one like it was any other social gathering. And then I saw it. Ruth pulling David aside near the entrance, her mouth close to his ear, her face hard. David nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt them, somehow, like a tremor running beneath the floorboards. They both turned to look at me, just for a second, before Ruth swept away toward the parking lot, Mark right behind her. David lingered. That night, the house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after someone's been taken from it. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Roy's chair sat empty across from me. I didn't have the heart to clear his plate from breakfast that morning. It still held the crumbs from the toast he never got to finish. David knocked gently on my bedroom door just after 9. I could see from his face that whatever Ruth had whispered, it hadn't left him since. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He sat on the edge of my bed, rubbing his hands together. "Mom," he began softly, "I need to tell you something. I didn't want to say it earlier, but you deserve to know." He paused, searching for words, and I knew whatever was coming next would break me in a different way. Ruth pulled me aside at the funeral. She said, "She and Mark are planning to sell the house. She told me to tell you to start packing your bags." He looked at me then, as if expecting me to cry, to shout, to fall apart. But I didn't. I sat very still. Like if I moved too fast, the moment might crack wide open. "They're selling the house," I asked, even though I'd heard him the first time. David nodded slowly. "She said now that Dad's gone, there's no point in you staying here alone, that it's time to make things more efficient. She's already contacted a realtor." The words floated in the air like ashes from a fire. My hands went cold. My throat tightened. This was the house Roy and I built with our own hands. I painted every room. He planted every tree. It wasn't just where we lived. It was the story of our lives written into walls and floorboards. This was the house where Ruth took her first steps, where David fell off the swing set and cried in my arms, where Roy taught me to dance in the kitchen after the kids went to sleep, and they wanted to sell it like it was nothing more than a tired old asset. I didn't say a word. I just nodded once and reached over to squeeze David's hand. He looked startled, like he hadn't expected me to take it so quietly. "Mom, I don't agree with her. I'm going to see what I can do. Maybe I can buy sometime. I just didn't want you blindsided." "It's all right," I whispered, even though it wasn't. "Thank you for telling me." David hesitated, but then stood, kissed the top of my head, and quietly left the room. I stared at the ceiling in the dark for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, in the silence of the home I was suddenly unwelcome in. Tomorrow, I would grieve my husband. Tonight, I let myself grieve something else entirely, the beginning of an ending I hadn't seen coming, and I went to bed in silence. This house wasn't just where we lived, it was us. I still remember the first day Roy and I stood on this patch of empty land, our hands covered in dirt, plans rolled up and flapping in the wind. We didn't have much money, just a little saved from our wedding gifts and a lot of grit between the two of us. But we had vision. And more than that, we had each other. Roy had always been handy. He came from a line of men who knew how to shape wood and hammer nails into something that stood tall against time. Me, I learned. I wasn't going to let him carry the dream alone. I held the ladder while he put up the frame, passed him tools, stained the cabinets, and painted every single wall myself. I still remember the soft green in the kitchen. We called it sage, though we probably got the cheapest paint on the shelf. The rose bushes out front, I planted those on our second anniversary, dug up the rocky soil with my bare hands. Roy built the trellies and said one day they'd bloom tall enough to frame our doorway. He was right. They did. We raised 2 children in this home. The living room still has the faint dent in the wall from the time David tripped while running in his socks and banged his shoulder against it. The hallway still echoes, if I let myself imagine hard enough, with Ruth's little girl giggles when she'd chase her brother with a wooden spoon. First birthdays, Christmas mornings, Sunday dinners when the smell of roast chicken meant everything was all right in the world, Roy reading the paper in his recliner. Me folding laundry at the kitchen table while Jeopardy played in the background. It was the kind of quiet life you didn't realize was gold until someone tried to take it away from you, but not everyone saw it like that. Ruth, Ruth always looked at this house like it was a prize to be claimed. Even before Roy passed, she'd started circling the subject like a hawk, always asking about the future, or if we had a transition plan for the property. I remember one dinner in particular. Roy had just turned 70. The kids came over for cake. Ruth brought Mark, of course, dressed like he was about to close a real estate deal even at the dinner table. "Dad," Ruth had said, spearing a piece of cake, "have you and Mom ever thought about downsizing? It's a lot of house, and it's only going to get harder." Roy didn't flinch. He rarely did. He just looked at her and replied, "This house is your mother's piece. When I'm gone, it's going to be what holds her steady." I didn't say anything then, just cleared the plates, but I heard him. And more importantly, Ruth did too. She didn't bring it up again that night, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't understand, maybe she never did. Ruth and Mark both saw the house as an asset. A number on a spreadsheet. Something to convert, liquidate, or make work for us, as Mark once said. They never sat on the porch swing at dusk, watching the fireflies come alive. Never heard the creak in the floorboard outside the bathroom and smiled because it always meant someone was home. They didn't feel the house, not the way Roy and I did. Now Roy's gone, and they're circling again, this time without the courtesy of waiting more than a week. I wandered into the living room this morning and just stood there, letting the stillness press against me. The cushions on the couch are a little flat, worn down by years of Roy falling asleep there during ball games. The little dish on the side table still holds his last spare set of keys. I couldn't bring myself to move them. There are ghosts here, not the kind that rattle chains or slam doors. These ghosts are quieter. They sit with me during breakfast. They hum Roy's favorite tune when I'm wiping the counter. They lean against the doorway when the wind blows just right. I walked down the hallway and stopped outside Ruth's old bedroom. I haven't opened that door in years. She moved out at 19 and only ever returned to visit, never to stay. When I opened it today, I found a room frozen in time, floral wallpaper peeling in the corner, the faint scent of old perfume still trapped in the carpet. She used to beg us to let her redecorate, saying it was embarrassing when friends came over. I remember telling her once, "One day you'll miss this wallpaper," and she rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd fall backward. Funny, I don't think she missed it at all. She doesn't want the wallpaper, or the old wood cabinets, or the swing set in the backyard that's rusted at the base. She wants the square footage, the resale value, the equity. Mark probably already ran the comps, probably told her, "We'll get top dollar, especially if you fix it up first, but you'll need to get her out of there." That's what I've become now. A footnote, a hurdle to clear. I stood in the doorway for a long time, gripping the edge of the frame, thinking how strange it is that something you poured your entire life into can be reduced to a line item on someone else's agenda. But I won't let this house be taken like that. Not without remembering why we built it. Not without fighting for the ghosts who still live here with me. It was exactly 7 days after Roy's funeral when I heard the knock. Not the gentle kind, not the kind neighbor's use. This knock was sharp, 3 clipped raps, businesslike. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. There they were. Ruth and Mark. Ruth in a sleek camel-colored coat, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Mark holding a folder and a travel coffee mug like he was stepping into a board meeting. "Hi, Mom," Ruth said brightly, like we were meeting for brunch. Behind them, parked along the curb, was a silver sedan with a magnetic sign that read Carrington Realty Group. A man and a woman were already stepping out, clipboards and tablet in hand. "What's this?" I asked, already knowing. Ruth breezed past me into the living room, followed by Mark. The realtors waited by the door like wolves on a leash. "We just wanted to come by and get things moving," she said, setting her handbag on my coffee table like it was hers. "We found a great place for you, by the way. Rose Pine Meadows. It's assisted living, but really lovely. There's a pond, bingo nights, and even an on-site hairdresser. You'll love the community, all people your own age." She said it like it was a gift, like she was doing me a favor. Mark added, "Honestly, Mom, the market is peaking. We need to time this right. Inventory's low, buyers are hungry. We're going to get a fantastic offer if we move quickly." He opened the folder and spread out papers like I was a client, not his wife's mother. Property valuation, listing agreement, suggested renovation budget, all color-coded and stapled. I stood there in my own living room, next to the couch Roy used to nap on, and suddenly felt like a trespasser. "And where exactly would I be going?" I asked, folding my arms. Ruth smiled as if she'd been waiting for me to ask. "Like I said, Rose Pine Meadows, it's not far. We even toured it for you. Your name's already on the interest list." I looked at her for a long moment. "Did you think I'd be grateful?" Ruth blinked. "Well, I thought you'd be relieved. You don't have to manage the house anymore. You'll have friends, structure. Honestly, Mom, I don't know how you're managing all of this alone." "I've managed just fine," I said quietly, "for nearly 50 years. Mark stepped in again, voice smooth and rehearsed. "We're just trying to ease the transition. The longer we wait, the more equity we risk losing. Homes this age, you've got to act fast. If we wait until the season turns, we're talking 10% lower, maybe more." I didn't say anything. I just looked at the forms he laid out like a buffet of betrayal. Mark pointed to a line near the bottom. "All we need is your signature here. You're the legal primary on the deed. Once we have that, we'll handle the listing process for you. Hassle-free." I sat down in Roy's chair. I didn't touch the pen. "I didn't touch anything. Did you bring me a box too?" I asked. "To pack my things?" Ruth narrowed her eyes, sensing the shift in my tone. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you. You didn't ask if I needed help." "Because we know you," she snapped before catching herself. She took a breath. "You don't like change, but sometimes change is good. This house is just too big for you now. It's not safe." I smiled at that. "You know what's not safe, Ruth? Letting your daughter sell the roof over your head while you're still mourning your husband." She looked away. Mark shifted but said nothing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just let the silence stretch long enough for them to fidget. Finally, Ruth exhaled and gathered the papers. "Think about it," she said stiffly. "But we really shouldn't waste time. The realtor's ready to take photos this week." I nodded slowly. "You can see yourselves out." The realtors, sensing the awkward tension, turned and left without a word. Mark followed, tapping on his phone. Ruth stood there a moment longer, her lips tight. "You always make things so difficult," she muttered. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The door closed behind them like the final note in a funeral hymn. That night, the phone rang. It was David. "Ruth told me she came by," he said. "She did," I replied. He sighed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know she was going to bring the realtors too. She's not wasting time." "No," he said, "she's not." There was a pause. Then, gently, "I've been trying to figure something out. Maybe I can move some things around, take a small loan, buy some time. I don't want you getting pushed out like this." My throat tightened. "David, that's not your burden. You're my mother, you're not a burden." That almost did it. But I swallowed hard and kept my voice even. "Do you want me to talk to Ruth?" he asked. "Maybe I can. No, I said. I need to handle this myself. Another pause, then softly, you're sure? I am. Because the moment Ruth handed me that folder, I stopped being sad and I started being angry. Grief has a strange way of sharpening things. The first few days after Roy's funeral, everything felt like it was covered in fog, thick, heavy, and impossible to see through. But once Ruth showed up with her realtors and paperwork, the fog didn't just lift. It burned off like the sun had come out, harsh and unforgiving, and I could suddenly see exactly where I stood. And I didn't like it. They thought I was fragile. Like I'd fold the minute someone used the right tone and called it practical. But Roy didn't marry a weak woman. He married a quiet one, yes, but quiet doesn't mean helpless. So I put the kettle on, pulled out a yellow legal pad from the kitchen drawer, and wrote 3 words in bold, steady letters: secure finances. Confront Ruth. Reclaim my life. It didn't matter that I hadn't balanced a budget spreadsheet since the kids were in school, or that I hadn't spoken to a lawyer in decades. I'd built a home from blueprints and dirt. I could learn this too. The next morning, I dressed like I was going to war. Pressed slacks, blouse buttoned to the collar, hair pulled into a neat bun. No makeup, just the same face Roy always said, didn't need a damn thing. And I walked into the First Union Bank like I still belonged to the world they thought I'd aged out of. A young man named Parker sat across from me at his desk. He wore a smile too wide and a tie too tight, but he listened. I'd like to ask about equity loans, I said, or reverse mortgages. I need to understand my options. He blinked. Are you looking to stay in your home, ma'am? Yes, I replied, and I intend to stay. He pulled up the property details, and I leaned in, pretending not to notice how surprised he looked when he saw the house was still entirely in mine and Roy's name. No transfer, no added owners, no secondary rights granted to Ruth or Mark. You're the sole deed holder now, Parker said, adjusting his tie. It looks like your husband left the entirety of the estate to you per the probate records. I thought so, I said, more to myself than to him. Ruth must have assumed we'd written her into everything, or that Roy had planned ahead the way she always pressured him to. But Roy knew me better than that, knew us better than that. He knew she'd try something, and he made sure I wouldn't be locked out of my own life. After the bank, I went straight to the law offices of Denson and Clark. It was a brick building just off Main, the kind with ivy on the sides and brass plaques by the door. The kind of place where people still called each other ma'am and sir without irony. I met with Mr. Harold Denson, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a spine that hadn't bent with age. I'm here because my daughter is trying to sell my house out from under me, I said. I want to know my rights. He nodded once and opened a file folder. Do you have the deed? I do, I said, pulling a copy from my handbag. And my husband's will. Everything was left to me. He read silently for a few minutes, his brow furrowing in places, and then he looked up. You're in the clear, he said. Legally, they can't do a thing unless you authorize it, and even then, you'd have to sign the listing documents, sale agreement, title transfer. They have no power of attorney, no estate claim, nothing. I felt something settle in my chest, a kind of quiet vindication. I don't want to sell, I said. I want to make sure they can't touch this place. Ever. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Then we'll make sure they can't. Would you like me to help you draft a protection clause in your will? Perhaps file a restriction on sale without dual signature? We can even put the property in a trust if you'd like. I blinked. Yes, all of it, he smiled. Good, let's begin. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground steady under my feet. Ruth's entire plan was built on an assumption that I'd be too broken, too tired, too lost without Roy to resist. She forgot one important thing. I didn't just live in this house. I built it, brick by brick, memory by memory. The betrayal didn't break me. It focused me. The pain became fuel. Each paper I signed, each clause I added, it all became armor. By the time I returned home that evening, I had more than just legal paperwork in my purse. I had a plan. I took out the yellow legal pad again, crossed off the first line, secure finances. Confront Ruth, reclaim my life. I knew the next part would be harder. Conversations with Ruth always left me feeling like I was walking barefoot on ice, careful not to slip, trying not to fall through. But this time, I wasn't the one off balance. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was preparing, because widow didn't mean weak, and my daughter was about to find that out the hard way. They came again on a Wednesday. I knew they would. It was late morning, just after I'd finished pruning the rose bushes Roy and I planted decades ago. I wiped the dirt from my palms with an old kitchen rag and straightened my spine when I saw Ruth's car pull into the driveway. This time, she wasn't alone. Again. She stepped out first, heels clicking against the concrete, folder tucked tightly beneath her arm. Her mouth was set in a firm, businesslike line. And right behind her came a well-dressed man in a gray blazer and slacks, holding a tablet and a camera bag slung over his shoulder. A new realtor, this one younger, slicker. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mom," Ruth said flatly, no hug, no smile. "Ruth," I answered. She walked in without invitation. The realtor followed, offering a small, polite nod that I didn't return. "We've already received an offer," she announced, setting the folder down on my coffee table like it was a done deal. "All cash, no contingencies, it's a strong buyer and they're eager to move quickly. We'd be doing them, and you, a disservice by dragging this out." I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. She continued, flipping through papers, voice tight and efficient. "We've tentatively scheduled the inspection for next Tuesday. If you sign today, we can close within 30 days. The realtor remained silent, standing off to the side like a shadow waiting for direction. I walked over slowly, picked up the folder, and closed it without looking inside. "You'll need to rescind the offer," I said. Ruth blinked. "Excuse me? This house isn't yours to sell." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't start this again. You said you were thinking it over. I gave you time. But this is the best path forward. You're not safe here anymore. You're just—" "I'm not finished," I interrupted, my voice quiet but steady. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out a crisp, cream-colored envelope, stamped, sealed, and marked certified legal notice. I held it out. She didn't take it, so I placed it gently on top of the folder. "That," I said, "is from my attorney, Mr. Harold Denson. It outlines my sole ownership of this property, the irrevocable rights I hold, and a formal request that you and your associates cease all attempts to list, market, or sell this house without my written consent." Ruth stood still for a moment. Then, slowly, her jaw clenched. "You went to a lawyer." "I did." "This is ridiculous," she snapped, picking up the envelope and flipping it over. "You're being manipulated. You don't understand the market. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." The color was rising in her cheeks now, blotchy and furious. "This is why no one wants to deal with you." She shouted, voice rising in the small room. "You're impossible. You're stubborn and ungrateful, and you never let anyone help you." I didn't react, not even a blink. "You stopped seeing me as a mother," I said softly, "the day you started seeing me as a burden." She froze. Mark wasn't with her this time, but I saw his ghost in the way the realtor shifted uncomfortably. Even he sensed the storm in the air. He started quietly packing his camera away, mumbling, "I'll just wait outside." Ruth's hands were trembling. I could see it in the way she tried to snap the folder shut. I walked to the door and opened it. "You need to go now." "Mom, I'm not your client, I'm not your patient, I'm not your investment, I am your mother, and this is still my home." Ruth stood there, caught between rage and disbelief, and for the first time she looked small. The power she'd always assumed she had through her voice, her presence, her paperwork, suddenly meant nothing. The walls that had once echoed with her childhood laughter now stood firm behind me. Without another word, she stormed past me and out to her car, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I watched her drive away without even raising my hand. The house was quiet again, but not empty. I walked back inside, sat down in Roy's chair, and let the silence settle around me like a warm shawl. The energy in the room had shifted, not loud or dramatic, just subtle and steady, like a floor that had been leveled, a foundation that had been reinforced. I picked up my yellow legal pad from the end table. One more line crossed off. Secure finances, confront Ruth, reclaim my life. Almost there. The house was quiet now, but not with sorrow, with purpose. After Ruth's last visit, something inside me settled, not in defeat, but in certainty. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reclaiming, and it started with my own two hands. I began in the kitchen. That leaky faucet Roy always meant to fix. I watched a few videos, found the right wrench, and did it myself. It dripped stubbornly for a few hours just to test my patience, then relented. I wiped my hands and smiled. Roy would have been proud, maybe a little amused. The cabinet door that creaked, the back porch step that wobbled, the drawer that always stuck. I tackled them one by one. It wasn't just about repairs, it was about ownership. Every squeaky hinge I oiled was another reminder: this is mine. This is still mine. The days were long and the nights were quiet, but not empty. One Thursday afternoon, I saw a flyer on the community bulletin board at the library: Grief Support Group Mondays at 6 p.m. St. Agnes Church basement. I almost walked past it, but something in me hesitated. Grief had been a companion lately, when I hadn't spoken to out loud. I figured it was time. That Monday, I sat in a cold metal chair beside a circle of strangers who all wore the same quiet ache: women and men with wrinkled hands and tired smiles. We shared stories about husbands lost, old routines broken, and the strange silence that filled their absence. I spoke, too, about Roy, about the roses, about the house that everyone suddenly wanted to tear apart like it was just drywall and lumber. After the meeting, a woman named Claire, widowed 3 years, invited me out for tea. She had the same kind eyes David did. We became fast friends. Sometimes we sat on my porch and talked about nothing at all, which felt like everything. A few weeks later, at another meeting, I mentioned the busted railing on my front steps. "I'll get to it eventually," I'd said. That's when Earl spoke up. He was in his 70s, tall, with skin like leather and hands that looked like they were made of oak. "Used to be a carpenter," he said, adjusting his cap. "Still like to tinker. I could take a look if you want." I hesitated. "I can't pay you, Earl," he shrugged. "Don't need pay, just good company." And just like that, he started showing up once a week. Sometimes he fixed things. Sometimes we just drank coffee on the porch. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was the kind of talk that stayed with you. Meanwhile, David visited more often, never to interfere, always just to help. He brought groceries, carried heavy boxes to the attic, changed light bulbs I couldn't reach. He never asked questions about Ruth. Never mentioned the house again. He didn't need to. One afternoon, I found him out back trimming the overgrown hedges without even asking. I stood in the kitchen and watched through the window, my heart full and aching at once. "Thanks for being here," I said when he came in, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're my mom," he said simply. "This is home." Those words, "this is home," meant more than he knew. As for Ruth, she stopped calling altogether. No birthday cards, no Sunday check-ins, not even an apology. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. But the silence spoke louder than her words ever did. And this time, I didn't rush to fill it. One rainy afternoon, while organizing the closet in Roy's study, I found a box tucked in the corner behind old sweaters. Inside, it was a weathered leather-bound journal. His journal. Roy had always scribbled notes, thoughts, little sketches, and measurements. I sat cross-legged on the floor and flipped through page after page, his blocky handwriting still so vivid. There were lists of home projects, rough drawings of porch swing ideas, notes about what fertilizer worked best on the roses. Then, toward the middle, on a page that had started to fade with time, I found a line that stopped me cold. "If they ever forget what this home meant, remind them whose hands built it." I read it again and again. Tears welled, but not from sorrow, from something deeper: recognition. He had always known, that they might forget, that they might reduce our life to property, to profit, to convenience. But he also knew me. I closed the journal and held it against my chest for a long time. That evening, I stood on the back porch with a cup of tea and looked out over the yard. The grass was freshly mowed, the flowers blooming, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in, loved. The ghosts hadn't left. They'd simply stopped whispering. Now they sat quietly with me, proud and still. I wasn't just surviving without Roy. I was building something again. The day I walked back into Mr. Denson's office, it was drizzling, just enough to make the sidewalks glisten and the air smell like fresh earth. The kind of weather Roy used to call good thinking weather. He'd say that right before pulling out a notepad or going to tinker with something in the shed. I guess it was good thinking weather after all. Harold Denson rose from his desk when I entered, still sharp in his gray wool vest and burgundy tie. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said with a smile, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'm ready to update the will," I replied, steady. He nodded, gestured to the chair across from him. "Do you have an idea of how you'd like to divide your estate?" "I do," I said, "and I need you to write it down exactly." He listened, pen poised as I spoke. The house goes to David. No conditions, no clauses, just him. He's the only one who ever treated it like a home. The rest, my savings, pension, and any proceeds from the small trust Roy left, should go to the Willow Creek Women's Shelter. Quietly, in Roy's name, no plaques or press. Mr. Denson raised his eyebrows slightly but said nothing. Oh, and the books, I added. Roy's first edition Steinbeck's, the vintage gardening manuals, the Appalachian folklore set he was so proud of. I want them donated to the county library. He always said books were the only real legacy that didn't rot. He smiled faintly. That's a beautiful gesture. I took a deep breath. As for Ruth, she gets $1. He stopped writing, looked up. And a letter, I continued, pulling a neatly folded page from my purse. He accepted it gently, reading the contents while I waited in silence. Ruth, this isn't punishment. This is proof. That love doesn't mean tolerance of cruelty. That being born into a family doesn't grant the right to erase someone's life because it's inconvenient. You saw this house as a transaction. I saw it as my heart. I hope one day you find something worth building, and when you do, I hope no one tries to take it from you. Mom. Mr. Denson folded the letter again and placed it carefully inside a new folder. She may contest it, he said softly. I expect she will, I replied, and I expect you'll be ready. He nodded. I will. It was strange how calm I felt walking back out into the drizzle, like something had been unlocked and I could finally exhale, not because of vengeance, but because of clarity. Roy used to say closure wasn't something you found, it was something you made. And I was finally making mine. 3 Saturdays later, I hosted a garden party. Nothing fancy, just paper lanterns, folding chairs, mismatched plates stacked on a tablecloth that flapped in the breeze. I invited the grief group, Claire, Earl, David, a few neighbors I barely knew but always waved to. Even the librarian came, the young woman with ink-stained fingers who was delighted to receive Roy's books last week. I cataloged them myself, she told me. Put his name in the inside cover, just like he would have wanted. We all brought something: cherry cobbler, sweet tea, pasta salad, deviled eggs. The air smelled like childhood summers, and charcoal from a small grill Earl insisted on firing up, just for the smell of it. There was laughter, real, generous laughter. The kind that wraps around your ribs and shakes something loose you didn't know you were holding on to. Someone brought a guitar. Another brought a story, and someone else, maybe me, cried a little when the sun hit the roses just right. David pulled me aside near dusk, a paper plate of peach pie in his hand. Dad would have loved this, he said. I looked around the yard, lights twinkling in the dusk, friends clinking glasses. A sense of peace filling the space where grief used to live. I think he does, I said. For a long time after Roy passed, the backyard had been silent, like the whole place was holding its breath. But now, in the warmth of that gathering, it felt like it was breathing again. Like the house was healing with me. I watched Claire slow dance with Earl on the porch. I watched David laugh with his daughter on the swing. I watched the wind ripple through the curtains of the sunroom where Roy used to read. And I realized I didn't just keep the house. I brought it back to life. The light came in soft that morning, spilling through the curtains in wide, golden ribbons. It warmed the old floorboards and stretched long across the hall like it had a memory of its own. I moved slowly, barefoot, the way I always did before coffee. The house was still, but not empty. Never empty. I walked past the photos lining the hallway, pausing like I always did at the one of Roy standing next to the trellis, back when the roses had just begun to climb. His smile was caught mid-laugh, head tilted slightly, eyes squinting at something I'd said behind the camera. I could still hear the sound of it if I closed my eyes. Next to him, another frame, David at age 5, holding a frog with both hands like it was sacred. His face is all cheeks and missing teeth, eyes wide with wonder. That was the summer Roy built the sandbox out back and let them fill it with dinosaurs and GI Joes. Then, Ruth. A school photo from her 8th grade year. Back when her eyes still softened when she looked at me, before life or pride hardened the edges. Her hair was a mess that day. She'd cried that morning because she didn't like the shirt I made her wear, and I'd said, "One day you'll laugh about this." She never did. I don't hate her. That surprises me sometimes. After everything she tried to take from me, not just the house, but the memories, the meaning, the right to claim my own life, I still can't summon hate. what I feel is grief. Not just for Roy, but for the daughter I lost somewhere along the way. The one who used to crawl into my bed when it stormed. The one who made me macaroni necklaces and believed our porch was a pirate ship. That girl faded long before she knocked on my door with realtors and spreadsheets. I just didn't realize it until too late. A few days ago, a letter came. The envelope was thick, expensive. Ruth's handwriting hadn't changed, still tight and angled, like she was afraid of wasting space. Inside was a single page. Mom, I didn't know it meant that much to you. I was trying to be efficient, trying to protect what was ours before it became a burden. I didn't mean to hurt you. Ruth. There was no apology, not really, just calculation. Even her guilt came dressed as strategy. I didn't write back. What was there left to say? Some people grow apart like waves pulling back from shore, so slowly you don't feel it until you're already ankle deep in cold distance. And some ties, once stretched too thin, don't snap with a bang. They fray quietly until one day there's just slack where love used to be. She may come around again one day, or she may not. Either way, I've stopped waiting at the window. This morning, I sat in the sunroom with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the dust dance in the light. A soft breeze creaked the screen door open just an inch, like the house was sighing. Everywhere I looked, there was something real. The Afghan Roy's mother crocheted when we were first married, still draped over the same armchair. The scratch in the hallway from when David pushed his tricycle into the wall. The mark above the kitchen threshold where we'd measured the kids' heights each year in pencil. Ruth's last line was dated 1997. I never erased it. These weren't just things. They were proof. Proof that this wasn't just a structure. It was a history. They had called it just a house. Packed boxes, made plans, spoke in numbers and appraisals and timelines. But I lived here, really lived here. Through storms and joy, through silence and laughter, through births and deaths and seasons that changed both outside and in. They saw it as square footage. I saw it as a sacred place where my life unfolded one morning, one moment at a time. This was never their house to sell. It was mine to remember. And I will, every single day. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video. It helps more people hear voices like hers. Have you ever been made to feel like a burden by those you loved most? Share your story in the comments. We read every one. Subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories of resilience, justice, and quiet triumph. Because sometimes, the softest voices carry the deepest truths.